She won 2 Oscars. She made the world laugh. She made the world cry. And for decades, she was one of the most beloved women in Hollywood. But behind that warm smile and those unforgettable performances was a woman carrying pain so deep, so private, that most people never saw it coming. At 78 years old, Sally Field is facing something that no award, no applause, and no standing ovation could ever prepare her for. And here's the thing that breaks your heart even more. She saw pieces of it coming for years. She just couldn't stop it. Most people know Sally Field as the woman who stood on that Oscar stage and said those now legendary words. Most people remember her as Forrest Gump's mama, as Norma Ray, as the Flying Nun. They remember the laughter, the warmth, the talent that felt almost unfair. But very few people know what was happening behind closed doors. Very few people know about the childhood that left invisible scars, the marriages that quietly shattered her, the years she spent fighting for her own identity in a town that only valued her when she was useful to them. Very few people know the real Sally Field. And once you hear the full story, once you understand what she's been carrying all this time, you'll never look at her the same way again. This is her real story, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. There's a version of Sally Field that Hollywood sold to the world. Bubbly, charming, unshakably optimistic. The girl next door who made it big. The underdog who kept winning. And that version wasn't fake. She really is those things. But there's another version. The one she talked about in therapy for years. The one she finally started opening up about in her memoir, In Pieces. The one that shook everyone who read it because nobody expected what was hiding underneath all that success. Sally Margaret Field was born on November 6, 1946, in Pasadena, California. On the surface, it sounds like a classic Hollywood origin story. Actress mother, show business family, a little girl who was always performing, always reaching for the spotlight. But the spotlight in her house wasn't always warm. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother, Margaret, eventually remarried a man named Jock Mahoney, a stuntman and actor who would go on to become one of Hollywood's better-known figures. On paper, it looked like a picture-perfect blended family. A new home, new opportunities. Behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. Sally has spoken carefully but painfully about what happened during those years, about boundaries that were crossed, about a childhood where confusion and fear lived right alongside the laughter. She was a little girl trying to understand a world that wasn't safe, in a home where she felt like she couldn't tell anyone the truth. And so she performed. She smiled. She became the girl everyone thought they knew. That pattern, perform, smile, protect yourself with talent, followed Sally Field into her adult life in ways that took decades to fully understand. She got her first big break at 19 with The Flying Nun. Cute, marketable, easy to sell. And Sally played it perfectly. But even then, she was already fighting to be taken seriously. Already being told she was one thing when she knew she was so much more. That tension between who the world wanted her to be and who she actually was would define the next 6 decades of her life. And it would cost her more than most people can imagine. Here's something most people don't know about Sally Field. She didn't have a childhood that looked the way it felt. From the outside, everything made sense. She had a mother in the industry, a stepfather who was well known, a home in California, opportunities most kids would never get. But Sally has said, in her own words, that she spent years of her adult life trying to piece together what actually happened to her. As a child, trying to name things that were difficult to name, trying to heal from wounds that nobody in her life ever officially acknowledged. In her memoir, she described her stepfather Jock Mahoney in ways that were deeply uncomfortable to read. She chose her words deliberately. She talked about physical closeness that felt wrong, about confusion, about a child's brain trying to process something it shouldn't have had to process at all. She didn't use the harshest possible language, but she didn't need to. The weight of what she was saying was clear, and what made it even more painful was this: her mother stayed. Her mother didn't fully see it, or didn't let herself see it, or wasn't equipped to protect her daughter from it. And Sally loved her mother. Complicated, imperfect, deeply human love. She spent years angry at her, years trying to understand her, Years sitting in therapy asking questions that never had clean answers. That kind of wound doesn't heal quickly. It doesn't heal fully. It changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you let people get close to you. It changes the way you perform, and whether you perform for the world because you love it, or because it's the only place you ever felt like you were allowed to exist. For Sally Field, the truth was probably somewhere in the middle. And as she grew older, as the fame got bigger and the pressure got heavier, that wound she'd been carrying since childhood started showing up in places she never expected. By the time Sally Field became a household name, she had already lived through more than one heartbreak that the public knew nothing about. Her first marriage was to Steve Craig, a high school sweetheart. She was just 22. He was kind, safe, familiar, and maybe that's exactly why she chose him, because after a childhood filled with confusion and fear, safe felt like love. They had 2 sons together, Peter and Eli, and for a while, it worked. But Sally was changing, growing, becoming something bigger than the small, contained life she'd built, and Steve wasn't growing in the same direction. By 1975, it was over. She was 28, a single mother of 2, trying to hold a career together while her personal life quietly fell apart. Then came Burt Reynolds. Oh, Burt Reynolds. If you want to understand how thoroughly someone can love another person and still be completely wrong for them, look at Sally Field and Burt Reynolds. They met on the set of Smokey and the Bandit in 1977. The chemistry was immediate and undeniable. They were electric together on screen. And off screen, the relationship burned just as bright and just as dangerously. Burt was charming in a way that made it difficult to think clearly. He was larger than life, magnetic, and he adored Sally, in his way, in his moments, on his terms. But Burt Reynolds was also a man with an enormous ego, deep insecurities he never fully faced, and a complicated relationship with intimacy that made him difficult to truly reach. Sally has said that she loved him completely, desperately, in a way that scared her. And Burt, years later, admitted he'd let her go, that he regretted it, that she was the one. But by then it was too late. Their relationship ended in 1982, and it left a mark on Sally that took years to fully acknowledge. She married again, to producer Alan Greisman in 1984. That marriage lasted 10 years before ending in 1994. 3 attempts at love, 2 divorces, 1 devastating near miss. And through all of it, she kept working, kept performing, kept showing up on screen with that smile that nobody ever questioned. In 1980, Sally Field won her first Academy Award for Norma Ray. It was deserved. It was stunning, and it changed everything. She had fought so hard for that role. She had been told for years that she was the flying nun, that she was cute and charming but not serious, not a real actress, not someone you built a drama around. Norma Ray proved them all wrong. But here's the thing about winning. Sometimes the victory arrives and the emptiness arrives with it. Sally has talked about the strange psychological experience of achieving something you've wanted for so long and then standing in the middle of it and feeling hollow, feeling like the validation you thought would fix everything didn't fix anything because the awards weren't what she actually needed. The approval of the industry wasn't what was going to heal the little girl who grew up feeling unseen and unsafe. And then came 1985, her second Oscar, Places in the Heart, and the speech that the entire world remembers. You like me. Right now, you like me. People have laughed at that line for 40 years. They've turned it into a joke, a meme, a punchline. But Sally Field has said that moment came from somewhere real and somewhere raw. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't planned. It was a woman standing on the biggest stage in the world, finally feeling seen, and not knowing what to do with it except blurt out the truth. And the truth was, she had never been sure anyone really liked her. Not as herself. Not underneath the performances and the smiles and the roles. The audience laughed. But if you understand her story, if you understand where she came from, those words aren't funny at all. They're one of the most honest things anyone has ever said on that stage. And what comes next in her story makes those words hit even harder. What Hollywood never tells you about its brightest stars is how many of them are quietly falling apart. Sally Field was one of them. For years, she battled depression in a way that the public never fully saw. Not a performative, public breakdown. Not the kind of crisis that makes headlines. The quiet kind. The getting out of bed anyway kind. The showing up on set and giving everything you have kind. While your inner world is completely underwater, she has spoken about the years she spent in therapy trying to untangle her childhood, her relationships, her career, her identity, trying to figure out where Sally Field the actress ended and Sally Field the actual human being began. That's harder than it sounds when you've been performing since you were 19, when your face has been on television screens and movie posters for the better part of 6 decades, when the world thinks it knows you because it's watched you on screen. Therapy helped. Writing her memoir helped, but neither of those things made it easy. Her memoir, In Pieces, came out in 2018, and it was not the soft, carefully managed Hollywood memoir people expected. It was raw. It was specific. It was a woman in her 70s finally deciding she was done protecting other people's comfort at the expense of her own truth. People who read it were stunned by its honesty, and some people were uncomfortable. Because when someone that beloved tells you the story you thought you knew was missing entire chapters, it forces you to reckon with how little you actually understood. And if you think the battles she fought inside her own mind were the heaviest thing she carried, wait until you hear about the losses that were still coming. If you want to understand where Sally Field is right now, at 78 years old, you have to understand what she has lost. Not just the relationships, not just the years. She lost Burt Reynolds in September 2018, just weeks after her memoir came out. He died of a cardiac arrest at 82, and even though they had been apart for decades, even though their relationship had been complicated and painful, she grieved him. Of course she did. You don't love someone the way she loved him and just move past it cleanly. That's not how human beings work. But the loss that has hit Sally Field the hardest, the one she has spoken about with a kind of quiet devastation that is difficult to listen to, is the ongoing weight of watching the people you love suffer and being unable to fix it. She has 3 children. She loves them fiercely, and like any parent, she carries their pain alongside her own. She has also spoken in recent years about aging in Hollywood, about what it means to be a woman in her late 70s in an industry that spent most of her career telling her she was either too young, too cute, too serious, or too old. She is still working, still showing up, still fighting for roles that have substance and meaning. But the fight is different now, heavier, more personal. And as she approaches the end of her 8th decade of life, Sally Field is asking questions that don't have easy answers about legacy, about love, about what any of it meant. In 2005, Sally Field went public with something that had nothing to do with Hollywood. She announced that she had been diagnosed with osteoporosis. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a headline-grabbing crisis. But for a woman whose physical strength had always been part of how she moved through the world, how she threw herself into physical roles, how she kept pace with a brutal industry, it was a quiet but significant blow. She became an advocate for bone health awareness. She channeled it into purpose. That's very Sally Field. Take the hard thing and find a way to make it useful. But the diagnosis was also a reminder of something she's spoken about more directly. As she's gotten older, the body keeps the score. The years of stress, the pressure, the unresolved trauma, it lives somewhere. It finds you eventually. One of the most quietly devastating things Sally Field has ever said in an interview is this. She said she doesn't know if she ever truly knew how to receive love. She could give it. She gave it generously, desperately, sometimes in ways that cost her too much. But receiving it, really letting it land, really believing she deserved it, that was the work of a lifetime. She said therapy taught her that the patterns started early, that a child who grows up in an environment of confusion and unspoken harm learns to be hypervigilant, learns to read rooms, learns to perform safety instead of actually feeling it. And those patterns followed her into every relationship she ever had, every marriage, every love affair, every friendship. She was always slightly waiting for the other shoe to drop, always slightly convinced that if someone saw the real her, they'd leave. That's the part of her story that cuts the deepest, not the divorces, not the career battles. The fact that one of the most genuinely lovable women in American entertainment spent most of her life not quite believing she was lovable at all. She has 3 sons, Peter Craig, Eli Craig, and Sam Greisman. All 3 have gone into creative fields in their own ways. Peter became a successful screenwriter. Eli became a filmmaker. Sam has worked in television. She has said, without hesitation, that motherhood is the role she is most proud of. Not Norma Rae, not the Oscars, not the decades of acclaimed performances, her kids. But she's also been honest about the ways that her own wounds affected her parenting. The ways that unresolved pain gets passed down without anyone meaning it to. The ways she had to actively work, in therapy, in conversation, in humility, to break cycles that started long before she did. She didn't pretend to be a perfect mother. She was a human one. And her sons, by all accounts, love her fiercely for it. Here's what people miss about Sally Field at 78. She's not done. She is still acting, still advocating, still showing up in ways that remind you why she mattered so much in the first place. Her recent work has continued to earn critical recognition. She has spoken passionately about the need for complex roles for older women, roles that don't reduce them to grandmothers or props or nostalgic footnotes in someone else's story. She pushes back on Hollywood's treatment of aging women with the same quiet ferocity she brought to fighting for serious roles in the 1970s. She's been doing this her whole career. The target has just shifted, and there is something extraordinarily moving about watching a woman who has survived what she has survived: the childhood trauma, the failed marriages, the industry's cruelty, the private battles with her own mind, still standing, still creating, still insisting that her story isn't finished. So where is Sally Field right now? She is 78 years old. She lives in Los Angeles. She is close with her sons. She continues to work when the right projects come along. She has said in recent interviews that she is, perhaps for the first time in her life, genuinely at peace with who she is. Not without pain, not without grief, but with a kind of hard-won clarity that only comes from doing the work. She knows who she is now. That might sound simple, but for someone who spent decades performing a version of herself for a world that kept asking her to be smaller, quieter, easier, knowing who you are is revolutionary. The trauma is still there. It doesn't disappear, but she has learned, finally, to carry it without being crushed by it. She is someone who survived, who created, who loved imperfectly and completely, who told her truth even when it was uncomfortable, who kept getting up. At 78, Sally Field is not a tragedy. She is proof that it is possible to walk through fire and still come out the other side, with your soul intact, and that is the most remarkable performance of her entire career. If Sally's story moved you, if you saw something of your own story in hers, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell us what Sally Field has meant to you, because stories like hers deserve to be heard.